Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Scott's Selections here with StatSalt.com. Yesterday, everybody who tuned in heard me talk for about 2 hours about the first round of March Madness, where I previewed the first round matchups of the tournament and what I thought about the overall, what I thought about all the teams for the most part. But it did get a little long with about 2 hours in the stream, and I did receive some feedback telling me that I did get a little bit off the beacon path, so to speak. And I kind of went down the rabbit hole and started talking a little bit in tangents. So if that bothered you, I apologize for that, and I will keep that in mind in the future. And I promise you that this video will be significantly shorter than the previous video. So with that being said, I'm going to start right now. And we are going to be going through the second round of the NCAA tournament based on my projections, of course. And I will go all the way through until I have determined who I think will win the national championship. So as people start to file in, I'm just going to start right here and then answer any questions if, people come in and they want me to cover any game in particular. But without further ado, we are going to get started between Duke and UCF. And as I said yesterday, VCU concerns me based on the fact that their leading scorer, Marcus Evans, is not at 100% as he suffered a serious knee injury, and he might play in this game, but he will definitely not be at 100%. And I think UCF has enough to get past VCU. But between Duke and UCF, I can only look towards Duke in this game. UCF, yes, they play a very solid defense. Yes, they have a 7'6" guy in Taco Fall in the paint, and I understand that. But Duke was Zion's a different animal, and even defensively, they're fantastic. In terms of spreads, I'm not going to speculate on what I think the spread's going to be because there's no point in me trying to say that Duke will cover this 15-point spread. It turns out the spread is actually 20. That's kind of just a waste of time. So overall, I think that Duke will take care of business against UCF. I'm not picking any upsets. So for the rest of this tournament, it will mostly be a money line prediction on just who I think will win the games outright. So I like Duke to beat UCF. Moving on, I have Liberty beating Mississippi State. As I said yesterday, I just think Scotty James and company are too good in terms of defense, and they're a top 10 free throw shooting team in the country. Mississippi State, since their guard Nick Weatherspoon got suspended in mid-February, Mississippi State has not beaten a tournament quality team, and I think that's a major red flag. I think Liberty is one of the most underrated teams in the entire tournament, and if you watch them against Lipscomb in the Atlantic Sun Conference Championship game, this defense is Virginia-esque. Of course, it's not as much talent as Virginia, but stylistically, it's pretty much the same as Virginia's in the sense that offensive rebounding, they tend to go for with about one guy, and they'll send four guys back just to stop the fast break. Mississippi State pretty much loves to only thrive on offense in the fast break, so forcing the Bulldogs into a half-court set the entire game will cause them problems, and I think Liberty will win this game outright in the first 12v5 upset of the tournament. But moving on, I have Liberty playing against Virginia Tech. This game is a game where I feel like everybody will be on Virginia Tech because of the fact that Justin Robinson is coming back, which is a huge deal, and there's nothing to underestimate going into the tournament because Justin Robinson was their senior point guard, and he was averaging double-digit points per game, but he is now healthy after missing about 12 games due to a foot injury. I think Liberty could make this game really competitive, but I think Virginia Tech simply just has too much firepower. Buzz Williams is a tremendous coach. I mean, if you remember him from the Marquette years, but he tends to do pretty well in the tournament. And overall, Virginia Tech has multiple players who average double-digit points per game. I think Virginia Tech's a little too deep. This game will turn into a defensive slugfest by any means. In terms of the game, I'd have to lean towards the under between these teams in Liberty and Virginia Tech because both teams tend to play very physical defense, and they're completely content with playing half-court offense for the majority, if not the entirety, of the game. So I will have to go with Virginia Tech in that one to win it. But I would go with the under in that game whenever that line comes out. If it's somewhere in the 120s, I say 126 and up, I would take the under in that game because I think that game has low 60s, high 50s written all over it for both teams. Moving on, Belmont and Maryland. Now, this one is actually going to be contingent upon who wins the game tonight between Belmont and Temple. And just to remind everybody, a couple of days ago, I gave out as one of my selections, I have Belmont -3.5 against Temple in this game, which is supposed to kick off at roughly 9:10 Eastern time tonight. So I like Belmont. The line has gone down a bit to 3, but I'm not concerned at all, especially with the desperation fouls at the end of games in a winner-take-all situation. I still think Belmont's too good for Temple. I think they're a deeper team. I think that they're a more efficient team. I think Alston and Rose might be the best players on the court, which sides with Temple, except for the fact that both of them are shooting less than 43% from the floor. So Belmont's one of the most efficient teams in the country. They score one of the most points in the country. And yet Temple has two guys who they rely on for the bulk of their scoring, and they are extremely inefficient. I think that's a really bad sign for Temple tonight against Belmont, and I think Belmont will win that game by, I'd say, at least 5 points. So even if that spread goes up to 3.5 or 4 before tip, I really don't care. I think Belmont's the better team. I think Belmont will get the job done. And as I said yesterday, so anyway, to continue on that, Belmont would then be playing Maryland. And I like Belmont in that game in the 11v6 upset. It seems like every year there's one team that's in the first 4 games that tends to make it to the Sweet 16 or so, where you know that an 11 seed will capitalize on the extra momentum that they've built up from the extra game. And I think that Belmont is this type of team where Belmont is so efficient on offense, and assuming that they end up getting their starting center back, who missed the conference championship game due to an injury. He's questionable for the game tonight. They're not really surprised that nobody really knows. Belmont's definitely going to try to keep it under the radar, so Temple will not be able to scout for his absence or presence, depending on which, based on the fact that they don't want to give any material for Temple to scout them for, and I understand that. So I personally think he will play. Even if he's not, I think Belmont's good enough to beat Temple. For Maryland game, though, they are going to need him back, because of the fact that Fernando for Maryland is an absolute tank. Anytime you're averaging a double-double in college and you're roughly 7 feet tall as a center. By the way, to answer your question, Brent, I started this literally 5 minutes ago. So if you're just showing up, I just started with the Duke game, and I'm working my way down. So just to recap so far, I got Duke beating UCF. I got Virginia Tech beating Liberty, but I like the under in that game. And now I'm on the Belmont game. So I started roughly 6 minutes ago, give or take, so you really just didn't miss much. But I'm going to move forward. As I said, this will be a quicker video than yesterday, because yesterday's video took about 2 hours, and I'm aware that a lot of you have lives, and I'm sorry if that took up 2 hours of your time, when it probably could have taken up 1 or 1.5 if I was a little bit more timely with my information. So I will keep trying to keep this going. So I think Belmont will be able to handle Maryland, assuming that their starting center is back, which he should be, because of the fact that they would play the round of 64 game on March 21st. So they would have a day off in between, so that should be fine. But if Temple wins this game tonight, then I actually think Maryland will beat Temple. I think that game will be really close, assuming with Alston and Rose, but I really just don't see how Temple's going to stop Fernando in the paint. They don't really have any big men depth at all, and I think Maryland with Cowan at the point as well as Fernando. I think Fernando's one of the most underrated players in the tournament, but Belmont has their own elite-level center, and his status will be paramount for the Bruins to take care of business in that game against Maryland, but I think he will be back, so I will be taking Belmont with the upset against Maryland in the 11v6 matchup. Just a reminder, any of the people watching, if you have any questions that you want or games you want me to address, don't be shy. Put it into the comment section. I'll gladly look at it when I end up approaching the games, or if you have any questions about March Madness in general or some general bracket strategies. But to move on, I said yesterday in one of my first shockers, I have Yale beating LSU in the 14v3. You got to pick your upset somewhere. And LSU, a team that ended up blowing a game against Florida, a team with an interim head coach who blew the game against Florida by getting a technical foul late in that game. LSU is a solid team, but I think everybody can acknowledge the fact that they have overachieved so far this season. I don't think anybody thought they would finish so well in the SEC. I think they're due for a letdown, and I think that the interim coach will definitely cause that to occur faster than the regular coach would have. So I like Yale in that game and a lot of points. And then you end up getting Belmont against Yale in that game, and I'm going with Belmont. I don't have the exact statistics, but I found out that when a double-digit seed is playing against another double-digit seed, the better seed, so if an 11 is playing the 13, the 11 will win the game. I think it's over 75% of the time. You can search up the stats. I've seen it before. I forgot the exact numbers, but I remember it came up a year ago or so when Syracuse ended up playing Middle Tennessee State after Middle Tennessee State upset Michigan State. And the stat I heard was that the team with the better seed in the double digits wins that game over 75% of the time. It's probably even over 80. I don't really have that number in front of me, but I will always go with the better seeded double-digit team over the higher seeded double-digit team. So I'll take the 11 over the 14 in this one with Belmont. However, if it is Temple in this, I mean, if it is Maryland in this game, I will be going with Maryland over Yale because I think Fernando's too much to handle. But overall, I'm going with what I think, and I think Temple's going to win. So I'm going to take Temple into the round of 16. Moving on, I have Louisville versus Michigan State. I don't really need to explain either of those games. I don't really like Minnesota at all. I think the Big Ten's overrated. And Bradley, good for them for coming back against Northern Iowa. They don't have enough offense. Michigan State's going to kill this team. But for Louisville against Michigan State, if you want to go relatively bold, I would not mind a Louisville upset pick here against Michigan State because of the fact that Louisville has already beaten Michigan State this year. Now, that was in the Yum Yum Center for Louisville, but the fact that these teams have played before and Louisville has shown success is definitely a good sign for taking an upset pick. And I'm also not really sold to Michigan State long-term based on how Izzo's underachieved in recent tournaments, even though he's one of the greatest college coaches of all time. But for this game, I will take Michigan State on a neutral. I just think Michigan State's the better overall team. But if you want to get a little bit interesting, and if you're one of those people that have Duke winning the championship and want to try to find a way to differentiate yourself in that bracket, I would recommend trying to pick Louisville over Michigan State. Look for a little bit of an upset. Louisville, they almost beat Duke this year, but they choked it. They beat North Carolina on the road by 20. They beat Michigan State at home. They have a lot of quality wins. The only problem is that, and you also have Chris Mack, who's a phenomenal underdog coach in the NCAA tournament with his years at Xavier. And Chris Mack's one of those coaches who would always seem like Xavier. They'd always do badly when they were a very good seed, a top 3 seed. But anytime they were a 6 or a 7 or above, they would go on some type of Sweet 16 run. I think Louisville's a live dog. I think Michigan State will win, and I'll be a little bit cautious on that in this bracket. But if you want a little extra value or you want to try to find a little angle for you to, find a way to differentiate yourself in this bracket pool, taking Louisville to win this game against Michigan State is definitely a pretty solid way to look at it. But I will be taking Michigan State in what should be a nail-biter. Moving on, I got Virginia versus Mississippi. Mississippi versus Oklahoma, honestly, can go either way, but I didn't really like how Oklahoma closed out the year, so I will be going with Ole Miss. But I wasn't really thrilled that Ole Miss choked away a lead against Alabama in the conference tournament. But that game's a toss-up. It's the 8-9s. Every year, as people know, the 8-9s are roughly 50-50. But I think it doesn't matter. Regardless, I think Virginia will beat both of those teams, Mississippi or Oklahoma, and I think Virginia's going to win that game. Not really much to be said. Virginia should win its quadrant extremely easily, and their odds to win their quadrant are either in the low plus 100s or in the minus range because of the fact that their region is so weak. So I think Virginia will win that. In terms of Wisconsin and Oregon, that game's a toss-up. I'm going with Wisconsin. I just think that Wisconsin will not turn the ball over. That game will be one of the most hideous games in the entire tournament. So if you're a fan of basketball, I recommend not tuning in for that Oregon-Wisconsin game at all, because that game will be hideous. If you want to pick a 12-5, I don't blame you for taking Oregon. I'm going to take Wisconsin. And for Kansas State, UC Irvine, yesterday I gave out Kansas State. That is entirely dependent on the status of Dean Wade. If Dean Wade's playing, I like Kansas State. If Dean Wade is not playing, I will flip my answer to the Anteaters of UC Irvine, just because of the fact that Dean Wade is that important to Kansas State, and Kansas State simply cannot score. They average less than 66 points per game. That game's a rock fest also between Kansas State and UC Irvine. That game's going to, first to 60 is going to win that game. And I will go with Kansas State, assuming Dean Wade plays. But to continue it onward, this could be the easy 12 versus 13 matchup. These two games can go either way because all 4 of these teams are extremely volatile, and they could lose to anybody at any time because their offenses are so anemic. But I'm going to take Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's favored for a reason. They have experience, and I think that Ethan Happ will do whatever he wants on the low block, except hit free throws, of course. But Kansas State, I will say for now, is going to beat UC Irvine. I like the winner of Kansas State and UC Irvine to make it to the Sweet 16. And so I think regardless of whether Kansas State wins or if UC Irvine wins, I think that any of those two teams will beat the winner of the Oregon-Wisconsin team. So I will be taking the 4-13 seeds to make it to the Sweet 16 in that game, depending on the status of Dean Wade, of course. So even if Dean Wade does play, by no means do I recommend taking the spread of Kansas State against UC Irvine, because this team doesn't score enough points. Kansas State, UC Irvine will be decided by roughly 2 or 3 points. This game will be a nail-biter, and if Dean Wade doesn't play, UC Irvine might win this game by 5 or 6. So I don't know, but I will be taking, as I said before, Kansas State and UC Irvine, whoever wins that game, to beat the winner of the Oregon and Wisconsin game. Moving on, Villanova against St. Mary's. Love St. Mary's, but I said I like Villanova in that game, and I said yesterday my big upset is taking Purdue over – I was taking Purdue to lose to Old Dominion in that game. Old Dominion's a terrible shooting team in terms of efficiency. They shoot roughly 41% from the floor. But I just don't trust Purdue, and I never will trust Purdue. It seems like every year all the talking heads on TV will go out of their way to talk about how Purdue's in a line to make the Final Four. Now, they like Purdue to make a run. And they think that Purdue, under Coach Painter, is going to do something. Then they always lay an egg. The same story every year. And yet, for some reason, people continue to pick Purdue. I like Old Dominion in an upset, especially with the value at plus 13. I definitely like the spread in that game. I said yesterday, parlay the Old Dominion spread with the under in that game, and that looks like free money to me. Because if Purdue is going to win this game will go over. And if Old Dominion is going to cover the spread, which I think they will, I think if Purdue's going to win this game, it will be by roughly 5 points or so. There's no way Purdue should be laying 13. So I like the under, and I like the Old Dominion plus 13. And those are my recommendations for that first round game. But the reason why I also like Old Dominion is because something you have to keep in mind in these brackets is that the only time you ever actually lose these brackets is when you take a double-digit seed to make it to the Sweet 16 or beyond, and they lose in the first round. So if you take a 14 seed to upset a 3, and then you have the 14 seed losing in the round of 32, you limit your risk. Because that way, if they end up making a run, nobody else is going to have that team. Or at the same point, if they pull off the upset against Purdue or against anybody, you gain a point against everybody else. And you also kind of hedge your bet because you don't have them going too far, that if Purdue ends up beating Old Dominion, for example, if you have Villanova making it to the Sweet 16 anyway, then you simply lose 1 point from Purdue. So you hedge your bets. You end up not losing out on too many points from that upset pick. And I will be going with Old Dominion for that reason as well, because I think Villanova would beat Purdue anyway. So I think that there is a lot of value in terms of a bracket pool in taking Old Dominion to pull off the upset with the chance of getting an extra point over competitors, where in the long run, even if Old Dominion turns out to not win, you hedge your bet because you have Villanova in the Sweet 16 anyway, regardless of whether they were playing Purdue or not. So I like Villanova to beat Old Dominion, but I also like them to beat Purdue. As I said before, I don't trust Purdue in the NCAA tournament. They underachieve every year. I'm not really that impressed. Where Old Dominion simply just can't score on an efficient basis, and Old Dominion can only win the game one way. If their opponent scores roughly more than 60 points, Old Dominion will lose. And I think Villanova with Jay Wright is too well coached to lose that game to Old Dominion or Purdue. I will be taking Villanova in that game to make the round of 16. Moving on, Cincinnati and Tennessee. I previewed this yesterday on the first round live stream where somebody asked me about it. I like Cincinnati beating Tennessee in this game. And the main reason is, there's 2 reasons. One, I think Tennessee's overrated. I think Tennessee is a good team, but I think Tennessee tends to think ahead. It seems like they play really well and then they take a nap. It seems like they just get disinterested at random points in games, and I think that's a major red flag, especially against a team that plays with such physicality like Cincinnati does. Plus, I said before yesterday, this game will be in Ohio, which is completely unfair. But Cincinnati will be playing its first 2 games of the tournament in Columbus. So you know that all the fans and all the families of these players will be in attendance at this game in Columbus. And I think that will do a lot for Cincinnati. And I think Cincinnati will be able to get it done against Tennessee, who Tennessee always struck me as more of a finesse team. They like jump shots. They like to try to draw fouls. And Cincinnati is just a very hard-nosed defense led by Cronin as their coach. I think he's a great coach. I think Cincinnati is definitely in line for an upset in this side of the bracket. Moving on, you have North Carolina versus Utah State. Utah State, I think, will give North Carolina some problems early on, but I will be taking North Carolina because I just think they have too much offensive firepower. Now, moving on, Auburn versus Kansas. It's kind of the same thing where I said before with Purdue. I think you could take Northeastern winning against Kansas. I'm just going to take Kansas because I think they're a better rebounding team, and I think that Lawson. Just think they're too physical for Northeastern to handle. Auburn could lose at any time, and I think that's a real concern with these teams, how they get really hot at the end, but Auburn loves to live and die by the three-pointer. So if they go cold from the outside, they could lose to New Mexico State, but I'm going to give it to Auburn. And Kansas, I'll take Kansas over Northeastern. But in terms of the 5-4 matchup, I like Auburn to get the job done over Kansas. People love Bill Self. To be honest, I don't really know why. He's won one championship with one of the most high-profile programs in college basketball history, and the one championship he won was a virtual miracle in which Derrick Rose missed a free throw and Mario Chalmers hit a three-pointer at the other end to send it to overtime. I still think that if they didn't win that game, Bill Self wouldn't even be the coach right now. He's a very solid coach in terms of recruiting, and for the Big 12, he's miles ahead of the curve. But this year's team is significantly worse than previous years, and Auburn has the better guard play, and I think Bruce Pearl is a very underrated coach in March Madness, and I like Auburn to beat Kansas in that game. Moving on, Iowa State versus Houston. I like Houston to win that game. Iowa State, I know they won the Big 12. I know that they're rolling at the right time. But Houston, I think, has been extremely solid throughout the entire season, and I love what Kelvin Sampson's done with that program. I think he has been tremendous. I think that his ability to get Houston to win the regular season championship in his conference and to make it to the conference championship game is just a true testament to the season that they've been having. Houston can win a variety of ways. They can score a lot of points, and they can play shutdown defense. And Iowa State, they have been a better defensive team than they have been in recent years, but I think Houston's just too well-rounded under Kelvin Sampson. I think Houston will win that game. Plus, I think Iowa State is in a little bit of an upset alert against Ohio State, just because of the fact that I know Iowa State should win this game, but the fact that Ohio State feels like they shouldn't have even been in the tournament in the first place makes me a little bit concerned that this team could potentially upset somebody or two, just based on the fact that I feel like they shouldn't be in there at all. And teams with second lives that are probably undeserved tend to play with a little bit more focus based on the fact that they feel like they shouldn't be there in the first place and they need to prove something with a little chip on their shoulder. But regardless, I think Houston would beat Ohio State or Iowa State in the second round. Moving on, I got Wofford against Kentucky. I love Wofford as a team. I think that they're a tremendous team. Fletcher McGee's great. They're well coached. I've watched them all year. This team swept the entire conference, and they didn't lose a conference game all year, including the tournament. They're fantastic. But I have to go with Kentucky. Kentucky has too many athletes. Kentucky has the 5-star recruits. It's the problem with college basketball is that eventually talent is just going to overcome anything that's like moral victories or anything like that. Kentucky's too talented. I think Wofford will give them a run for their money. But this reminds me of the first-round matchup last year between Kentucky and Davidson, where Davidson was a very fundamentally sound team, and they were on a roll, and they looked extremely solid. But at the end of the day, Kentucky just had too much talent, and they wore them down. I think Kentucky will dominate the glass. I think Kentucky will dominate the paint, and I think Wofford will be overwhelmed. But it's nothing for them to hang their heads down for. They've had a hell of a year, and good for Wofford, getting a 7 seed from such a small conference. But I think that they got the raw end having to face Kentucky in the second round. So I will be taking Kentucky there. Now moving on, Gonzaga-Syracuse. Popular upset pick with Syracuse, but I'm going with Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga has the big men. They have the shooting to handle the 2-3 zone. So I'm going to go with Gonzaga, but that game will be close. Marquette, Florida State. I like Florida State. I think Murray State could beat Marquette, of course, but I think Florida State would beat Murray State anyway. So I like Florida State making it to the Sweet 16. Vermont's a tricky team, but they don't have any depth. I think Anthony Lamb's is pretty much the entire team. They have one guy who can score, who can create his own shot. And Vermont's very well known for their rebounding this season. With I believe they have a top 5 rebounding rate in all of college basketball. That also has to do with the fact that they've been beating up on teams like Binghamton and like Hartford, where Florida State has been forced to play against the ACC elite, and they beat Virginia recently. I think Florida State's in a really good form with Leonard Hamilton at the helm, and I think that they have too much size, and I think Terrence Mann is a very solid guard. I'll take Florida State winning that game, and I think Florida State will make it to the Sweet 16. Now, moving on, Buffalo versus Texas Tech. I like Buffalo in that game. First of all, I think Arizona State will beat St. John's. I think it doesn't matter. I think Buffalo is too well-rounded of a team. I think Buffalo will beat either of those teams. Texas Tech against Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky I like with Drew McDonald, but they didn't have any weapons, and Texas Tech's had a great year, and I think Chris Beard is a tremendous coach in college basketball, so I like Texas Tech to win that game. And between Buffalo and Texas Tech, I'm going to warn you right now, my West quadrant with Gonzaga is off the walls. I think that this quadrant can go anyway, and if it can go anyway, I will go for a somewhat shocking Final Four pick. But I'm going with just as a spoiler, I'm going with Buffalo to beat Texas Tech. Texas Tech's a very solid team, but I don't think this team can score. They have Culver, who's a very solid player who will be a first-rounder. Other than that, I don't really see any weapons on offense. They're a good free-throw shooting team, but I don't see how this team's going to score more than 70 points. And Buffalo can get up and down. Perkins is great. Massenberg's great. I think Buffalo has a tremendous team. And I think Texas Tech's inability to score on a regular basis will be its inevitable demise. Moving on, Florida versus Michigan. Now, Florida versus Nevada can go either way. I just really don't like Nevada. I don't trust Nevada. And these games where you have an up-tempo team versus a team that loves to slow it down, typically the team that slows it down tends to win based on the fact that they will definitely control the tempo of play. And Nevada's come out sleepwalking in a decent amount of their games this season. They're a very good second-half team, but Nevada tends to be just struggling in the first half. And I think Florida, with their SEC run to get them into the tournament, has built some confidence. And I think Florida is a very live dog to make a run in this tournament. And so I got Florida beating Nevada. The game's a toss-up, but I will go with Florida and the better defense, the more fundamentally sound team. And Michigan against Montana, I like Michigan. Needless to say, I'm not really going to talk about it. But between Florida and Michigan, this is an ultimate rock fight. First team to 60 is going to win. And since that's the case, both teams are almost exactly the same stylistically. I will be taking Florida to upset Michigan in this game in the 10v2. And I actually had a future on Florida. This isn't going to spoil the bracket because I don't have Florida actually making this run. But in some books, Florida to make it to the Final Four was plus 4,000 or plus 4,500 in terms of Bovada. But I have a book which offered Florida to make it to the Final Four at plus 7,500. So needless to say, I put $10 on that to win $750. Do I think Florida will get to the Final Four? No. But if they beat Michigan, which I think that they're capable of doing, then I think that that'll set up a very good hedging opportunity for me to make at least a couple of $100. But I will take Florida to beat Michigan. I think that those teams are almost exactly the same. First team to 60 will win. And in a game with two teams that are stylistically the same, I will ride with the underdog with a shot of value for a bracket pool. Now, moving on back to the Duke side, I got Duke versus Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech in the round of 16 is extremely solid. And honestly, a part of me I'm going to do multiple brackets just for my pools. A part of me wants to take Virginia Tech to beat Duke as a slight hedge, and I love this Virginia Tech team. I think this Virginia Tech team is amazing, and with Justin Robinson back, this team's only going to get better. But I got to go with Duke. Duke, I know that Virginia Tech beat Duke recently, but that was roughly a 3-point game throughout, and Zion didn't even play. I have to assume that Zion's going to do whatever he wants in the paint. But Duke can't shoot from the outside. That's very concerning. But I will be going with Duke in this game. In terms of spreads, I'm not touching it. Virginia Tech will keep this game very close. These teams are conference foes. They played each other earlier this year. I like Duke to win the game, but there's no way that I would ever take the spread or total in this game. I think it'll be very close. Now, moving on, I have Belmont against Michigan State, or even if it was Maryland, or even if it was Temple, or even if it was Yale, hypothetically, Michigan State, I think, will win this game. I think Michigan State's test, in my opinion, I think Michigan State will have a harder time with Louisville than they would with a hypothetical LSU. I think LSU is losing in the first round, but hypothetically, if LSU were to make it to this point, I still think Michigan State's the better team. I think Michigan State, if they get past Louisville, they'll make it to the Elite Eight, in my opinion. I think the Sweet 16 game, they'll do fine. You give them an extra 4 days off with Izzo. Izzo will come up with a great game plan, and I think that Michigan State will make it to the Elite Eight. Louisville's that concerning team. If you're gonna pick Michigan State to lose early because you don't trust them, I would pick Louisville. That's just all I'm saying about that. But moving on, Michigan State, I think they'll beat Belmont. I think they'll beat Maryland. I think they'll beat LSU. I think they'll beat all these teams if they get that far. I like Michigan State to make it to the Elite Eight in a matchup against Duke, which everybody wants to see. Moving on, you have Virginia versus Kansas State or UC Irvine, depending on the status of Dean Wade. And overall, I think Virginia will win this game. UC Irvine and Kansas State, very similar teams in the sense, actually all these teams in the region are almost the same in the sense that nobody can score on a regular basis. Virginia is very efficient, but they play such a slow-paced game that this game will be low-scoring no matter what. Virginia, Kansas State, and Virginia, UC Irvine, that's another first team to 60 wins. I don't think Kansas State or Irvine would score more than 55 points in this game, based on the fact that Virginia's defense is elite every year. I know that Virginia tends to choke in the tournament, but this year, I have to go with them just to make a run. This is the best opportunity they've had in probably ever. I know that they blew a double-digit lead to Syracuse a while back in the Elite Eight, but looking at their region is so easy that if there's any year for Virginia to make it to the Final Four and to make a potential serious run, this would be the year. And I will be going with Virginia to beat Kansas State or UC Irvine to make it into the Elite Eight. So if you're afraid of Virginia, I don't see Minnesota or Oklahoma beating them. I don't see Wisconsin getting close. I don't see Kansas State getting close. I don't see Irvine getting close. I don't see Oregon close. So based on that, I don't really know how Virginia does not make it into the Elite Eight. But moving on, you have Villanova against Old Dominion. You have Villanova against Cincinnati in that upset. And I also like the Cincinnati pick here because I think Villanova would be a live dog against Tennessee. So you're kind of hedging it slightly. But I will be going with Villanova to beat Cincinnati to set up a 1v6 matchup between Villanova and Virginia. I think Villanova, similar to the first match I talked about between Virginia and Kansas State, both the teams don't score a lot of points, but Villanova has more weapons. I think Villanova will get the job done against Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati will play really well in Columbus, but with the extra 4 or 5 days off, I got to go with Jay Wright in these games, so I will take Villanova to set up a matchup with Virginia in the Elite Eight. Moving on, I like North Carolina to beat Auburn. Both teams are inconsistent, but North Carolina has been extremely solid lately, and Auburn lives and dies by the 3. They can lose to anybody. I think North Carolina is going to beat them up physically in the paint with May, and I think that North Carolina will win that game to make it to the Elite Eight. Moving on, you got Houston against Kentucky. I like Houston a lot, but I'm going with Kentucky. I think Kentucky with the Reed Travis back, that's a huge factor that nobody's talking about. Reed Travis missed about, I'd say, 2 weeks, and during that time period, they got smacked by Tennessee, and people thought Kentucky was relatively overrated. Keldon Johnson's great. Harrow's great. Travis is great. Washington's great. This Kentucky team is very deep. I know they're inexperienced, but they're inexperienced every year, and I know Calipari's underachieved in recent tournaments. But I will be going with Kentucky to beat Houston in this game due to just their superior athletes, and I think Kentucky will win this game. It will be very close. There's no way I touch the spread in that game, but I think Kentucky will win to set up a 1v2 matchup between Carolina and Kentucky. Now back to the Elite Eight. Just a reminder, if anybody has any questions or comments, you can mention it. Okay, so Michael has a question. Does the bracket have to be completely filled out today or just the first round? The way that it works is that it depends. As far as I know, ESPN and Yahoo, which I'm assuming you're using one of the two. Are you using one of the two, Michael? Because I know that those two tend to be the most popular online sites between Yahoo and ESPN for the relative tournament challenge. The way that it works, though, is that the brackets do not include the first 4 games based on online brackets. So, for example, you can wait until both the Belmont game ends and the St. John games end tomorrow, and then you can fill out your bracket. However, you have to fill your entire bracket out before the first actual tournament game is played. You can't fill out the first round and then fill out the second round after the first round ends. You have to fill your entire bracket out before the first game on Thursday. But it does not have to be filled out during the first 4 games on Tuesday night and Wednesday night, just for clarity. Does that make sense, Michael? Just let me know if that does make sense, and I'll try to explain it a little bit more. But for the most part, no. You have to fill out your entire bracket, but by Thursday morning. So you have another 2 days in order to fill it out, which is why I said if Belmont or Temple, because I could change my bracket based on who wins those first 4 games. I was just also giving my projections on who I think will win those games. Now, hopefully that answered your question. I'm going to move on because I don't want this to get to another 2-hour video. I'll go back to the Duke section. Actually, no, sorry, I missed out on the Gonzaga section. Now you have Gonzaga versus Florida State. This game has me torn, and it's had me torn for the last couple of days that I've been thinking about it. I don't think Gonzaga is making it to the Final Four. And Gonzaga is a great team. Mark Few's a great coach, but I think St. Mary's showed the blueprint on how to beat Gonzaga. And by doing that, you have to slow the ball to a crawl, and you have to prevent Gonzaga from getting fast break opportunities, which is something that they're really good at doing. I'm actually going to go with Florida State here. I think Florida State has the depth, and I think they have the size to bother Gonzaga. And Gonzaga, I thought, was the favorite to win the championship when Zion was injured. But against St. Mary's, they've showed their signature flaw, which is the fact that Gonzaga tends to lack this killer instinct, which you need in order to make a serious run in the tournament. I know they made it to the finals a couple of years ago, but we can acknowledge the fact that their region turned into a joke. They struggled against Northwestern. They struggled against South Carolina that year. That Gonzaga team that made it to the championship game did not impress me in the tournament based on who they've had to play. And Gonzaga, I think they're going to stumble again. And I think Florida State with Leonard Hamilton has a lot of depth. They looked really good in the ACC tournament. They looked good against Duke for the first half, and then they fell apart in the second half. But that's Duke. They stayed close. I think Florida State will beat Gonzaga in a relative shocker, and I will take Florida State to make it into the Elite Eight in an upset here. Now, moving on, I have Buffalo against Florida in my round of 16. I said before, and I warned everybody here, that my West side is off the walls. It's nuts. The other three are relatively sane, where I have a 1v6, I have a 1v2, and I have a 1v2. Here, I have chaos because I feel like every year there's one quadrant where everybody, regardless of projections, just explodes. Last year was Loyola Chicago made the Final Four, but overall, in this game, Buffalo versus Florida, I will go with Buffalo. Maybe just personal preference. I really like this Buffalo team. I've watched them all year. I know the MAC isn't the most amazing conference, but this team plays very underrated defense. But with Massenberg, Perkins, and Harris, this team is nuts. And last year, they were in the tournament. They shocked Arizona in the first round. They destroyed Arizona, and then they were in a one-point game with Kentucky late in that second half before eventually the wheels came off. But I think last year they'll learn from that experience. I think that Buffalo is a tremendous team. And if you watch them play, this team is legit. And I think Florida, they are going to beat. I think they'll beat Michigan, but I think this game will be really close. I don't think Florida can score enough points to keep up with Buffalo. I think Buffalo could win in a variety of ways where they could win a rock fight, but they could also win a shootout. Florida can only win one way. And I think Buffalo would get to that magical number of 70, and I don't think Florida would reach that number. So I will go with Buffalo to win that game to make it to the Elite Eight, which sets up, so just to recap, my Elite Eight right now, I got Duke against Michigan State, I got Virginia against Villanova, I got North Carolina against Kentucky, and I got Florida State against Buffalo. Now I will be moving it on to the Final Four. To the Final Four. Between Duke and Michigan State, I'm going with Duke. Michigan State, I think, is a little bit overrated. Yes, they played really well. Yes, they have a very solid team. Duke is just too big. Duke has too many weapons here. I know McQuaid's a very solid player, but I mean, he comes off screens all the time. Trey Jones will probably guard him. He's a very good defender. He'll be able to go around screens and to limit McQuaid in his three-point opportunities. Winston's almost unguardable, but I think Barrett's size will cause Michigan State serious problems. Plus, the injury to Aaron significantly hurts Michigan State's depth on the interior, and I think Zion will go off again in that game. So I will go with Duke to make it to the Final Four. Moving on, Virginia versus Villanova in the 1v6 matchup. I actually like Virginia to make it to the Final Four. Villanova, even though I have them making a run, I have not been impressed with them all year long. They've been significantly worse than they have been in recent years. And I know that this is typically the type of game Virginia would lose in the tournament, but they have to get over the hump sometime. And I think that they'll get over the hump this year and that they will beat Villanova in the Elite Eight due to Kyle Guy, due to DeAndre Hunter being healthy, due to their elite-level defense. I think Virginia will win that game. I think it'll be very close, but I like Virginia to get the job done, led by Kyle Guy, to make it to their first Final Four appearance in a long time. And moving on, you got Carolina and Kentucky. First of all, I'm going to be clear. I root for Carolina. I always have. My favorite college basketball player to this day is still Tyler Hansbrough. Love North Carolina, but I've seen North Carolina play all year, and I know that they're rolling. I know they've looked really good, but I watched them earlier this year, and they are extremely inconsistent. And Kentucky already beat North Carolina on a neutral court earlier this year, and I simply think that Kentucky is the better team than North Carolina. North Carolina is clicking, and they only lost to Duke by 1 with Zion. I get that. But Kobe White's really good, but he takes a lot of shots. Kenny Williams, I think North Carolina settles too much for three-pointers. I think that they could bully people on the interior, but they choose to get extremely desperate when it comes to chasing three-pointers with Cameron Johnson and Kenny Williams and Kobe White and even Luke May who shoots from the outside. I don't like North Carolina's big men. Luke May is good, but I don't really like anybody else on that team in terms of their interior defense. I think Kentucky with Keldon Johnson, with Reed Travis, with P.J. Washington, and Harrow as well, I think Kentucky will do enough to win that game, and I will be taking Kentucky to make it to the Final Four. So to recap my Final Four, I got Duke against Buffalo. Buffalo's the shocker if you're just joining us. I decided to go against the grain and tried to do something unique. I don't think Gonzaga's going to get there, and I will pick a team in which I think has value to make it to the Final Four. So I will go with Buffalo. Then on the other side, I got Virginia versus Kentucky in the other set of Final Four games. So you got Duke, Buffalo, and you got Virginia versus Kentucky. Now, this bracket could go up in flames early with Buffalo, but I don't really care. The point of March Madness is I'm not going to go relative chalk. I'm going to pick a couple upsets here and there, and I think Buffalo is one of those teams to make that type of run. So I got a 1 seed versus 6 seed and a 1 seed versus a 2 seed. Moving on to Duke and Buffalo, I'm taking Duke. Buffalo, I think, is going to have a Cinderella run. Every year seems to have a Cinderella run. I think Buffalo is one of those teams. They're a 6 seed, but they finished the year roughly in the top 15 in the AP poll, so I know that this team is a top 15 quality team. So I think that there is value on them. But Duke is Duke, and Zion is too big. Barrett is too versatile. I think Barrett's a little overrated in terms of NBA potential, but in college he's fantastic. And I think Reddish is also overrated in NBA terms, but in terms of college, if you have 3 of the top 5 picks in the draft, I have to assume you're going to take care of business in this game. What does concern me about Duke, though, in the long run is their lack of three-point shooting, which is awful, and their lack of bench. I think Jack White is one of the most useless players I've seen on an elite-level team in a long period of time. If you watch Jack White play, I don't know how he gets any minutes. And Bolden's injury is huge because it affects the depth, but I don't think Jack White's very talented. I do love Trey Jones. I do think Trey Jones is a very solid point guard. He can't really shoot, but defensively, he's fantastic. And every team needs that one glue guy to win games, and I think that he will get it done for Duke on the defensive end, and I think Duke will make it to the championship game. By the way, Michael, since it's on ESPN, your entire bracket has to be filled out by Thursday morning. So before the first official game of the second round, quote-unquote, which I can pull up right now, but before the first game on Thursday, you have to fill out your entire bracket. So you can simply wait until the St. John's game ends with Arizona State and the Belmont game ends with Temple, and then you could fill it out. So just keep that in mind moving forward. I'm just doing a premature opinion because of the fact that I also like just covering every team now because I had a lot of free time, and I believe that it's important to cover. I've covered all these teams at some point or another, either with StatSalt or in my own personal betting account. So I'm already experienced with these teams, so I felt like it didn't really matter when I gave a recap, so I felt like doing it now. But moving on, Virginia versus Kentucky. The idea of having 2 teams from the same conference in the title game is offensive to me, and I refuse to do it. I don't remember when the last time that's actually happened, where you have 2 teams from the same conference playing in the championship game. I can't pick that. There's no way I can pick that. I will take Kentucky to beat Virginia. I think that Virginia with Guy and Hunter are great, but I do think that Kentucky, when healthy, with Reed Travis and P.J. Washington, will dominate the boards, and that's something that has definitely hurt Virginia in the past. Their lack of size on the inside. I think that Kentucky will shoot somewhere in the realm of like 40%. I don't think they'll shoot well. I think Virginia will shoot roughly 44%. I think they'll shoot a better percentage. But I know that Kentucky will dominate in second chance points and free throw attempts. And I think that that'll do enough to get Kentucky a very, very slim win against Virginia. I like this Virginia team. I kind of hope I'm wrong in a way because I really want to see Tony Bennett succeed because he's a tremendous coach. And that's the current knock on him in his career, that he's underachieved in the tournament. I think Kentucky's too talented, and I will take Kentucky to make it to the national championship game against Duke in a 1v2 matchup. Duke and Kentucky in the championship game. Now, I hate to be like everybody else, but Duke against Kentucky. I know that the favorite never tends to win the tournament. I have to go with Duke. I think Duke's going to win this game against Kentucky. I think Zion is simply unguardable. I think the fact that he's forced to go to college is a complete waste of time for everybody involved, because Zion right now, if he went straight out of high school, would have been a top 2 pick minimum if he just came straight out of high school. He didn't need to go to college. He was guaranteed to go top 2. So you have him, who's a transcendent type player. Nobody can guard him. It's a waste of time. Barrett can create a shot at any time, and he gets the foul line a lot. And Reddish, he's a very streaky shooter from the outside, but when he's on, he's on. And I like Trey Jones defensively. Kentucky's a great team. They could win, but in terms of offensive firepower with Harrow and Johnson, I mean, there's no discussion here. You'd definitely rather take Barrett and Reddish over those two. And then in terms of big men, would you rather have Reed Travis and P.J. Washington or Zion Williamson? The answer is Zion Williamson. In terms of scores, because I'm on Yahoo, so you need a score tiebreaker, I think it's going to be like 72-66. And this game will be close. I think it'll be lower scoring than people think. But I like Duke to win the national championship. So, and I apologize in advance that my champion is similar to about 90% of people who have been talking about it on any of the main outlets. And usually they're wrong. So that does not bode well for me in this bracket. But overall, I just can't bring myself to pick a team to beat Duke. There's no way that I can. If you look at the teams, with Zion on the court, Duke's lost 1 game. Or they've lost 2 games, actually. They've lost to Syracuse at home, but in that game, Cam Reddish didn't even play. So Duke's lost 1 game the entire year at full strength. And that game was the neutral against Gonzaga in the Maui tournament championship game. And I don't think Gonzaga is going to get far enough to play Duke in the Final Four. I don't think Gonzaga is going to make it. So based on that, I don't know who's going to beat Duke. I don't see anybody beating Duke. I personally despise Duke because I'm a North Carolina fan. But the one thing I do like money more than North Carolina, and I think that Duke is definitely the favorite to win the championship, and I think they should win the championship. And you also have Coach K, who's arguably the best. I mean, in my opinion, I think he's the best college basketball coach of all time. You can argue John Wooden, but either or. Duke checks all the boxes. Their bench is not great, which is concerning, and Bolden's injury, I think, is a concern. But I just think I think Duke can get a bucket on any given possession, and I don't think many other teams can do that. And I think that's definitely a problem for teams that have to go up against Duke. But moving forward, that is going to do it for my bracket analysis. The 2-parter. Sorry if yesterday's video went a little bit long. It went about 2 hours. I kind of went a little bit off the path. Today, I tried to keep it more concise. I tried to stay on topic, and we're closing in at roughly 50 minutes. And I feel like that is a solid time for me to stop. But before I do that, does any of the people watching the live stream, if you have any questions that you want to ask me now, feel free to do so. I finished pretty much all the content I have to talk about, and I will answer any questions you have. I'm glad, Michael, I could help you out with your bracket questions. If anybody else has anything in particular, if you want to know about any futures I like or anything like that, I'll be more than happy to talk about it. But overall, I could give some leans for tonight. Do I think Liberty can make a Sweet 16? Run Catholic, nice to see you again. I saw you yesterday. Hope all is well with you. Do I think they can make a run? Yes. I love Liberty as a team. I think Scotty James is fantastic. I think that this team is very similar to Virginia in the sense that they have a top 20 defense, and they have a top 10 free throw shooting team. I love teams that capitalize on opportunities, and Liberty will dominate the pace of play, and they will. Truth is, Liberty, if they did not have to go up against Virginia Tech, I would have had them as a 12. I would have had them as a 12 seed making the Elite Eight. I think this Liberty team is actually that good. And I watched the entire game against Lipscomb in the conference title game. I think Liberty, if they did not have to go up against Virginia Tech, would have made it to the Elite Eight. Do I think they can make a Sweet 16 run? Yes. I think they definitely can. But the problem is that Virginia Tech, with Justin Robinson back, I think is a top 10 team in the country. Virginia Tech as a 4 seed doesn't account for the fact that their senior point guard is averaging double digits, is suddenly coming back after he missed about a month of the season. So based on that, I think Virginia Tech, I just think is too talented. Liberty can only win a game one way. In order to win, they have to limit their opponents to roughly 60, 65 points. And I think Virginia Tech could score 70 in that game. I think that game will be very close. And regardless of who's actually healthy for that game, assuming the stars are there, I think Liberty will cover the spread against Virginia Tech. I think that game will be a nail-biter. I think it will come down to the wire. But I think Virginia Tech has too many weapons for Liberty to handle. But I do think Liberty – would I be shocked if Liberty beat Virginia Tech? No. But I think Virginia Tech will win that game because of Robinson's return. And I think that'll do a lot emotionally for the team. But to answer your question, Catholic, I like Liberty a lot. I think I'm going to have a lot of money on Liberty to cover the spread against Mississippi State in the first round, and I will definitely have money on them winning the game outright because I think this Liberty team is fantastic. And people have been looking for that type of Loyola Chicago team, the fundamentally sound team that could randomly go on a run that a lot of people don't see, that kind of come out of nowhere, and then everyone won't stop talking about them for about the next week. I think that team could do Liberty. I think Liberty's really that good. But Virginia Tech is Virginia Tech, and I think Virginia Tech at full strength is a top 10 team in the country. If anybody else has any other questions they would like to know or anything they'd want to talk about, feel free to ask. In the meantime, I'm looking at the betting card for college basketball tonight. I know that I already said that we are on Belmont tonight. In terms of other games, the one thing that I hate about the NIT and the CIT, which you cannot cap for in the NCAA tournament, is the lack of motivation. And that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be betting on the NIT as well as the CIT. A lot of these teams, or a decent amount of these heavy favorites in the top seeds, tend to generally just not care. If I asked you right now, does Clemson really care about beating Wright State in the first round of the NIT after blowing a game against NC State that probably caused them to miss the entire tournament? Do you think Clemson's going to get up for this game and say, we really got to show Wright State who's boss? We got to beat this team by 30. Odds are probably not. Odds are you probably go into this game, Wright State knows they blew an opportunity against Northern Kentucky in their conference tournament title game to make it to the NCAA tournament, but Wright State is still a mid-major. You know that they still are going to be more motivated to play in this game than Clemson will be. Clemson doesn't care. They shouldn't care. I know Marcus Reed is going to be leaving, and I know that but Clemson was a top 25 team. They underachieved to the finish line. They blew a game against NC State where they pretty much didn't score for about 14 minutes in a game in the second half. So if you want me to make a play, I'll go for some leans here. I think motivation's a huge factor. I don't see Clemson seeing a lot of purpose in this game, and I don't think Clemson's going to try to run up the score on Wright State. Will Clemson win the game? Probably. They're more talented. But in terms of spreads, there's no way that I don't like Wright State tonight plus 12.5. It was at 13.5. It's come down to 12.5, probably for the same logic. I think Wright State will win that. I think Wright State will cover that spread against Clemson. These aren't official plays, because I tend to only give one play every day, and I'm only going to be giving on the NCAA tournament. But in terms of other leans, if I feel pretty confident in these, but I don't feel as confident as I do in the Belmont game tonight, I'll take the Wright State plus 12.5 tonight against Clemson. Game's in Clemson, but Clemson really shouldn't care. I don't think the fans really care. I don't think the fans are going to get ready on a Tuesday night and say, let me watch our team that failed to make the NCAA tournament play against Wright State on a random Tuesday. I don't really see people caring. Providence tonight, -6 seems too good to be true. Let me see about that. First off, I love Providence with Coach Cooley. I think Coach Cooley is an extremely underrated coach in college basketball, and what he's been able to do with that team is remarkable. I know Providence didn't make the tournament. I know people are going to say, well, what do you mean by that? Providence, they underachieved. The answer is no, they didn't. If you looked at their talent and their preseason projections, they were projected to miss the tournament. The fact that Providence was even on the bubble in the first place was just a testament to how good the coaching was with Cooley. Now, with Providence at -6, I have to like Providence -6 tonight, especially with the news regarding Arkansas with Gafford. For people who don't know, Gafford is Arkansas, in my opinion, their best player. And he officially announced that he will be skipping the NIT in order to declare for the NBA draft. And this is kind of a move that we've seen in football with regard to whether it was McCaffrey or whether it was I'm drawing a blank on some of the names here. But either or, college football players have started to not show up for, I think it was also Leonard Fournette. You have a couple of players who decide, I don't want to play in this bowl game. I'm going to save myself for the draft. I'm going to, there's no point. I'm not gaining anything from playing in this game. And Arkansas has to deal with that right now. Arkansas has underachieved throughout the season. And they also got killed by Florida in the second half of their conference tournament game. And now their best player in Daniel Gafford decided, you know what? I don't really care about the college and its success. I'm going to the NBA. So I don't care. In terms of who I like in that game, I have to like Providence. Because in terms of morale, how is Arkansas supposed to get motivated for this game when their best player just ditched the program? I don't know how Arkansas can look around and say, well, our best player is averaging double-digit points and leading our team in rebounding, suddenly decided this team isn't worth my time. But you know what? We're going to circle the wagons and we're going to win this game. I don't see that. I think Providence is going to win this game by double digits. I think Cooley will not let his team lay an egg in this situation. I think Cooley will get his team motivated. Cooley is going to take this game as a learning experience. Providence is a relatively young team, and I think that the more tournament runs they can go on, the better off the team will be in the long term. So I think Cooley will get Providence to make some sort of run in this tournament, not just the first round. They started at 5.5. They're already up to 7 in most spots. 6 is still available at Bovada. So if you have a Bovada account, I'd recommend betting 6 with Providence. Tonight, the Catholic, that's a good call by you. I was actually going to get to that game next, but I like Providence covering the spread. This game will close at roughly 8 or 9. I expect this to turn into a flood of money for Providence, not to mention the fact that this game is on at 9 o'clock, so it's going to be one of the late-night games, so you know that the people that have already lost money on the early games are going to be trying to double down and finding a game, and Arkansas losing their best player. I think Providence would beat Arkansas even if Gafford did play, but without Gafford and the fact that it's in Providence, there's no way I can't take Providence in this game. Money has come in on the over, though, in this game, which I find relatively fascinating, but I like Providence to get the job done at -6, and I would take that on Bovada now before it goes up to 6.5. But honestly, I like it at 6.5. Anywhere between 6 and 8, I'm a fan of. Once you get to the 9 or 8.5 range, I'm no longer a fan of that. But I like Wright State plus the 12.5. I like Providence -6 tonight. I already said I like Belmont -3 or 3.5, wherever you get it at. Other than that, just looking around here for any other games. I like Marshall beating IUPUI. Right now, the line started at -9. It's come down to -7. I'm just going to tell you right now, I like the Providence play more, and I like the Wright State play more. But in terms of leans, I do think there is value on Marshall in this game against IUPUI. IUPUI fell apart down the stretch this past season. They went 5-12 in road games. They're 6-9 against the spread on the road. They're 16-16 overall. IUPUI has lost, let me just check this out for a second. They've lost 7 of their last 9 games, IUPUI, and their last 2 games on the road have come by double digits. And Marshall, I know they lost Southern Mississippi in a neutral, but before that one loss to Southern Mississippi, they did win their last 6 games, and pretty much all of those games came by double digits. Plus, John Elmore, the main three-point shooter from Marshall, who was a large part in that upset victory over Wichita State last year, he's a senior, so this could be his last game at home, and I would not be surprised to see Marshall just lay it to IUPUI. I don't think IUPUI can stop Marshall offensively, and I think this game will turn into a track meet. Based on where the lines have turned out, the total started at 165. It's already up to 167 in some spots. This game will be a track meet. I think Marshall's going to score 90 points in this game. And I think that IUPUI has mentally checked out for the season as this team has fallen apart down the stretch. They had a chance to make a run the regular season in the Horizon League, and they laid an egg for about the second half of the year. And Marshall, even though they weren't able to make it back to the NCAA tournament, they were awful in the beginning of the year, and they went on a winning streak before losing to Southern Mississippi on a neutral. They're still a very solid home team. Marshall at home this season is 12-3. They're only 6-9 against the spread, but they're 12-3 at home, so their home-road dichotomy is definitely present. And I think Marshall will win that game pretty handily. Marshall will win that game by double digits. So in terms of the games I like tonight, Belmont was my quote-unquote premium play from a couple days ago. Other than that, for NIT action, I like Wright State plus 12.5 or anything above that. I like Wright State anything from plus 12 and up. Plus 11.5, you're kind of cutting it. But I like plus 12 or plus 12.5, and plus 12.5 is available. There are some plus 13s available. So if you can get plus 13.5, I take those. But for this sake, plus 12.5 on Wright State. I like Providence minus 6, anywhere up to minus 7.5. I think Providence will win that game by double digits. And I also like Marshall minus 7.5 against IUPUI in that game. But that's going to do it. I hope all of you enjoyed the rest of my recap on March Madness, where I covered the second round all the way through to the championship game, in which, if you're just joining us now, I will tell you I have Duke beating Kentucky in the championship game. But other than that, everything I said is subject to change. If I make any changes to my bracket, I will probably make a video in which I document that. Specifically with Kansas State, as I said before, Dean Wade's absence is huge if he is not playing, and just simply swap Kansas State for UC Irvine in my bracket if Dean Wade is not available to play. But I'll be making another video tomorrow in which I will be covering the I'll either be covering the Wednesday games or the Thursday games. I'll try to cover the Wednesday games because I'll try to go back to a daily best bet, so to speak, type of format. But I also might do some recaps of what I've noticed from the NCAA tournament so far in between rounds if people want to see that. But that remains to be seen. But either way, we're at the hour and 2 mark. That's going to do it for this installment of Scott Selections. I hope all of you enjoyed. It's nice seeing some familiar faces in the chat. And if just a reminder, if you're new and you like the information that you heard, I'd encourage everybody to like and subscribe as the feed, and also to provide some comments. If you want me to do something differently, you want me to focus on other games, or just to address some thoughts you realized after or as you were watching the video outside the live stream, just send a comment. I respond to every comment I get, and I look forward to communicating with all of you in the future, both in live stream or in comment section format. But that's going to do it for March 19th. I hope all of you have a good day, and let's cash this bet with Belmont tonight to move our record to 9-3. Have a good day, everybody.